Hello and welcome to another episode of Panel on Panels, the podcast about all things comics and comics related. I'm your host, John Campbell. Joining me as always, my co-host, Mike Gergoni.
Greetings.
And next to him, Mr. Donovan Eilert.
Hi everybody, how's it going?
And today we have once again taken the podcast on the road. We are actually sitting in the home of our guest today. We want to welcome to the show Matt Bogart.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. This is cool.
Thank you for letting us into your splendiferous home.
Yes.
Splendiferous?
I was trying it out, John.
How do you think it went?
That's how the landlord advertised it, actually.
Yeah.
Really? The listing was for splendiferous?
Nailed it.
He said that's just what we're looking for. So
Yeah.
we're here.
That's great.
So Matt, you create your own comics, primarily for an online format.
Sure. I do online comics and then occasionally collect them into print versions.
Yeah, you're the first guest we've had who works in that sort of medium.
In comics?
Well, no. That'd be, I guess, what would it be? Delivery method, or you're the first sort of web comic creator we've had on the show. We've had a lot of people who work in print comics, and
which is funny because I don't normally think of myself as a web comics creator. Mainly because most people tend to think of webcomics as like strips.
Exactly, yeah. No, because your books definitely feel like traditional comics in that, or like when you read them, they feel like they're to be collected.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess that was...
I think there's more and more webcomics out there today are more like that, where you get the sense that this is like someone drawing a page at a time and that it's meant to be in a book at one point. There's quite a few webcomics I read these days where there are like the traditional, like where a lot of webcomics started, which is like the 3-panel strip or like a couple of like Penny Arcade, Least I Could Do, a lot of those kind of types of comics where it's just like more like a paper strip, but a lot of them are like the long form, like this is going to look good on my bookshelf one of these days.
Right. This week's update is someone walks into a room and says a line, and then tune in next week.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, obviously, that's sort of your intention then. I mean, is that the goal of this? When you create this, is this sort of a means to get to the printed comic?
It's a little bit of both. It's a constant struggle because it's the way I naturally am inclined to write comics is writing like that. Like there's a page where I've captured like every little minute beat that has happened, every mannerism of a character. But that's at odds with the way the web works because you can't. If you're just showing that once every week, it becomes very boring. Whereas if you wait until you've got a whole scene finished, like there's months between updates. So it's a push and pull between those two. But
I've seen webcomics just flat out die because they have like 6 months in between updates. And yeah, they're putting up like 5 or 6 pages every time they update, or however many, but people can lose interest. On the internet, surprisingly, people can lose interest very quickly.
Yeah, I wonder why. Hopefully you're still listening to the show at this point.
Too late, John, there's Cats.
That's all right. Cats was always primarily
You're talking about the musical,
competition,
right?
yeah.
People are big fans of
Mr. Mephistopheles really just blew us out of the water.
Exactly. So, how often do you then try to update the comic?
oh gosh, that's this is a difficult time to be talking about that because I haven't published a comic on my website in a year.
Oh, wow.
I've done several comics that went exclusively to Kickstarter backers, and I've been, for the past 5 months or so, I've been writing the script to my next graphic novel. I'm taking a page out of like Brian Lee O'Malley's book where I wanted to write a finished script that was just needing to be drawn, but that takes months and months for me to do. But the schedule that I'd like to get on, I'm just about to the phase where I'm getting to draw this graphic novel, where I'm just about to leave the script writing phase, is publishing 2 updates a week. So,
And then, like I read through, is it, It's the End of the World? Was that you?
yes.
Which I love, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, really. I mean, I liked all the stuff I've read of yours, but that in particular really struck me. But I was sort of, what I was wondering is because it's online, but it does sort of feel like there are pages still to a certain extent. How do you decide on an update? Like, at what point do you go, okay, this is this week's or this day's update? Because it's not always just one page. Sometimes it's multiple what would be collected as pages.
Right. The way I've got it set up on my Patreon at the moment is because I needed to figure out in what installments people would donate to me. The way, if you're not familiar with Patreon works, every time you publish something, the people who are supporting you on Patreon give a certain amount of money. And I had to decide, well, what do I want to qualify as the something that they pay for? And it didn't seem right to have people pay for, like I said, like a guy walks into a room and says hello, and then next week you pay another 5 cents for the other person saying hello, and then so the way I'm doing it is
This week you get the establishing shot.
right. Is I'm updating it per scene. So sometimes a scene would just be one page,
Right.
but other times a scene would be 5 or 6 pages, which is really, I think, a better way to read it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it almost becomes, I mean, there's almost sort of when you say scenes, there's almost sort of a cinematic style to that as
Right.
well. Which, with something like that, I mean, I was really, like, I read all of that on your website in one sitting because it was I just kept clicking next. I want to know what's going to happen in that. Let's kind of take it back a little bit here to sort of your, we're always obsessed with people's origin stories. This is a comic book podcast after all. So one of the questions I always ask...
One of these days we're going to ask these questions and like get just an insane answer of just like, well, back when I was in a cocaine-fueled like drug haze in
Well, welcome,
1976.
He hasn't answered yet. Let's
Fair
see what
enough.
happens.
Yeah. It's funny you mention it.
But we always sort of start with this question about, do you remember the first comic that you read that sort of clicked you into the medium in a way?
It's tough to say because the one that I attribute with the one that making me want to draw comics
Sure.
regularly was Spider-Man 18 by Eric Larson. This was the not Amazing Spider-Man, but the relaunched in the 90s series. That was the first one where I picked it up in a Walden Books, I think, and thought, "Ooh, wow, this is something that's really got something to it."
Right.
I bought that and Wizard number 8.
Sure.
On the
Oh
same
man,
day.
Wizard magazine.
Yep.
Oh, it takes me back. It takes me back to Wizard magazine.
To when that existed.
Yeah.
It's funny though because this is actually this is a good sort of opportunity to use the podcast for my own means.
Yeah, please.
Oh, absolutely.
Years ago, as part of an off-campus trip in college, we went to Walt Simonson's house.
Oh, awesome.
Wow.
And he pulled out this comics page. It was a full-page spread of Thor. And he said, and he asked us all, do you know what's special about this comics page? And we said, it's a Jack Kirby Thor page. And he's like, I've got lots of Jack Kirby Thor pages. Do you know what's special about this page? And we said, no, I don't know what it is. Like, this is the original art for the first page of the first comic that made me say, oh, wow, comics are really something. So everything else in this house can be traced back to this one drawing.
Oh, man.
And subsequently, ever since then, I've been hunting for the first page of Spider-Man number 18. And even Eric Larson has no idea where it might be.
Yeah.
So I bring it up on a podcast.
Hey.
And maybe someone writes and says, I'd love to sell you that page.
You heard him, Internet.
Yeah.
Track down.
Name your price.
Here is a blank check. Write down what you think is fair.
No, but that would be cool. If somebody is listening to this and knows where that is, let us know. We would love to make that love connection happen.
Absolutely. What I love about that, too, is you just gave us your answer and Walt Simonson's answer
Yes.
to that question as well, which is amazing.
So we don't have to ask him when we get it.
Right.
Yeah, when we get
Yeah,
on the show,
exactly.
we're just going to skip right over
That's
that.
incredible. No, what I love, though, is people do... we had Trevor Dodge on the show, and he was able to say, what was it? It was like Daredevil 116 or whatever.
Something like that.
These comics do seem to be indelible in
Yeah.
people's lives. It was that comic, that issue... specifically. What do you think it was about that?
Oh, Ghost Rider has a flaming head.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Get you every time.
That is interesting. That's also frequently the answer. Like, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like Trevor Dodge talked about. It was the Daredevil No More Mr. Nice Guy, where he's got the big revolver on the cover, the
Oh,
Frank
yeah.
Miller. Yeah.
With like the yellow background?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just Daredevil with a huge hand cannon. And he's
And
like...
something about it just strikes you and clicks and makes you go, okay, now I'm thinking about the world differently.
Well, because it seems like it would have to be something like that. It would have to be something very visceral in that sense, or almost, I mean, it's difficult to explain to a certain extent, where it's just like there's something intangible or whatever about that. I mean, yeah, maybe it is something just as cool as like Ghost Rider looks awesome in this comic or whatever. This rendering of this character, something about that speaks to you in a way that's.
I mean, for me, in terms of like an image that will always stick in my brain in terms of like comics, it's what was it? The original Dark Horse's run of Godzilla comics, in like number 16 or something. He's traveling through time. Godzilla is, and at one point he sinks the Titanic. And it's just Godzilla rising up out of the water with the Titanic breaking over his back. That image is going to be seared into my brain forever.
That's so cool.
You wonder who got to draw that.
Right.
Oh, God, I used to know this.
That's so cool. Like that image.
Yeah, no, it's an
Oh,
awesome
I'm going to get that
image.
tattooed.
Well, that's like
On something. I
Like
don't
I've
know.
talked about the one of the first comics that really got me, and I wish I unfortunately don't. I was so young, I don't actually remember what the number or even who wrote it. But it was a Swamp Thing comic, and it ended with Santa Claus. This is insane. Flying his sleigh through the air, but there aren't reindeer; there are alligators.
Sure.
Right?
And I don't know, but that image will forever be burned in my head as like one of the first comic book images I can remember like latching onto as something.
Was that pre-crisis, or is that official DC continuity then?
Oh, this would have been.
Where does Santa Claus sit in the like official DC
Where does Santa
continuity?
Claus alligator?
I don't know. It was something. It was something with. It was something with Swamp Thing in like New Orleans, and so I don't know. That's like.
What did Santa Claus have anything to do with Swamp Thing? I don't know.
I don't know. I've been trying to track down what that comic is for years, just so I can like go back and read. But then another part of me is like, maybe I don't want to read it.
Have you confirmed that it existed and it wasn't just your?
Yes, yeah, I have actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's cool that around the world, this is not a Santa Claus podcast, but around the world they all have their own different version of who the Santa Claus figure is. I like the idea that in New Orleans he's exactly the same, but with alligators.
Right,
You know?
yeah.
Right? Like that's the only difference. He's not even Cajun or anything. He just has alligators.
Right.
And is one of them red nosed? Snouted?
no.
It's blood.
It's blood. That's why they chose him to be the leader, because he was the deadliest alligator of them all. Different reindeer names.
And then sort of going from that. So obviously you grew up as a comics fan then.
Yeah, I started publishing comics like maybe that year.
Oh, so I was going to ask, at what point
Yeah.
does it become like I want to do this, and then how do you go about like what were the first steps towards like how do I make comics?
It was realizing that my dad owned a copying machine, or that my dad's office had a copying machine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And me and my friend Joe, whose comics I brought out a little bit earlier, started publishing comics and selling them in the local comic book store, and then it took over the rest of my life.
Oh wow. So what do you remember? What the earliest comics you were doing were?
Those comics were. Yes, I remember them.
Okay.
That's the best answer to that.
Okay. I was going to say you could choose to share that with us or not.
Actually, I forgot. That is another. That's an older Patreon reward that I have on my page. I sound like I'm just pimping my Patreon.
No, it's fine.
But
It's topical.
I don't remember what the reward level is, but the deal would be to scan in the first 22-page comic it was called Shockwaves.
Okay.
And it was awesome, and distributed as an ebook to my Patreon backers.
Nice.
Very
so there
cool.
are other people out in the world that have that.
But, yeah.
Wow. How lucky for them.
Yeah.
You should back Matt on Patreon so you can see Shockwaves.
Yeah, there you go. That's the primary reason to do it.
Yeah.
There's-
Well, I mean,
and other reasons.
other reasons.
Also some other
Livelihood, continuing to work in the field that he loves, but mostly
But
for
also,
shockwaves.
as the cherry on top.
Yeah, I think we all had stuff like. I mean, I remember trying to do stuff like that. I mean, I had a character called Whipman.
Whipman.
Yeah.
John, please tell me, did he use a whip?
Oh yeah, he had two of them. I mean,
Oh.
the thing was like, and then I eventually discovered a character named Whiplash, and was like, oh, this guy kind of already exists.
That's how you do it.
But I remember it was this. Yeah, it seemed like to me it was just like superhero. He needs a thing.
Yep.
Whips, and I think I also pretty much just ripped off the origin of Robin as well, where he was like in the circus, or kind of Hawkeye a little bit as well,
Sure.
actually. But yeah, everybody starts somewhere, I guess, with this stuff. I also quickly learned I could not draw at all.
See, I never learned, so I'm still doing it.
Well,
if anything, I think that's the trick with most visual
right,
artists.
exactly.
Like, never learning that you can't do it, and eventually you just get to the point where you can.
So going from that, was that always the goal then? It was always, from then on, it was always to make comics?
It was, yeah. In a weird way, I went to college for comics, and right about that time, I stopped reading and drawing them
Okay.
for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
So, but I always thought of myself as a cartoonist, just taking a weird detour. So yeah, it was essentially the idea ever since then, although it's tough to prove that for a long period of time.
So you went to college for comics. Where did you go to college?
I went to Savannah College of Art and Design.
And they have a specific, like a dedicated comics program there?
Yep. I have a very fancy Bachelor of Fine Arts in the area of sequential art.
Okay. Oh, there you just sequential art is the more official.
Yeah, I don't have a degree in comics. That would be childish.
Of course.
God's forbid.
So what does that program look like? Like, what? I mean, is this a traditional 4-year?
It is. It's a 4-year school. I have difficulty comparing it to other programs because they're all foreign to me. The people that sat down and wrote lots of papers and such things.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. I learned about like the history of Batman and.
Please tell me there was a Batman 101 class, and then an advanced Batman.
You can minor in Batman.
Yeah.
Wow.
No.
I think everybody
Soon,
at
I
this
don't
table
know.
would do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So they
Majored in English, I minored in Batman.
So you minor in vigilante justice.
there you go. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
exactly. Vigilante justice. They're also talking about the Punisher and stuff in there.
Yeah, exactly. Just Batman would be ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a lot of vigilantes in comics. I'd say the comics are full of them. So, what kind of stuff were they? I mean, was it like history of Batman sort of stuff? Or?
There was a history of comics class, which included like the history of Batman and the Golden Age and the Silver Age and such things. But there's all the foundations classes, like life drawing and color and composition studies and things. But then there was character design and penciling and inking classes and cover painting for comics and such things. It was all over the place. It was good. Even though I it kind of killed my comics drawing.
It did sound like that, yeah.
But
what do you think? What do you attribute that to? I mean, what do you think happened there?
there was cartoonists are often spend their time by themselves, working as it's a very sort of solitary medium.
Sure.
And I think a whole bunch of cartoonists got to college and realized that they can hang out with other people. And that took a lot of time away from drawing comics.
Once you find other people who are of a same mind and you can become, friends with, that
I don't
really
think that's
starts
it,
to
man.
detract on the whole like loner artist thing.
Well, that was my theory, is because we did. There was a whole bunch of us cartoonists that ended up doing theater projects and making music and such things. And we were curious as to why the theater department was full of cartoonists, and that's what I attribute it to. Is everyone realized they could leave their houses and be with like-minded people? Because this was all pre-internet,
Right.
so this was a revelation that there were other people out there like you.
Yeah, exactly. I have to imagine it would be even harder now with the internet, because now instead of drawing or whatever, you can literally just get on your phone or laptop or whatever and be talking to thousands of people.
I've often thought about that about the podcasts that I listen to.
Oh yeah.
It's like, these are an awful lot like friends that I have. I just never see them or speak to them.
I had a very bizarre experience actually just this last weekend. I was up in Seattle for PAX, and I saw Jeff Kanata. He does a video game podcast I listen to called DLC, and it's like, I listen to you every week. I know the sound of your voice. I know your opinions. You're like, I know you, and yet I walk up to the man, shake his hand, and go, I know you, but you don't know me, and this is a weird thing, but I appreciate your existence, and that's just it's such a weird interaction to
Yeah.
have.
It feels like you've been spying on them in some
Right.
way. Like,
Yeah, no, it's really strange, because I feel exactly the same way with podcasts. I thought you were going to tell a story that somebody came up to you and said that. 'Cause I was
Yeah,
like, that'd be-
right, John.
And
That's
then I
the
was-
dream.
Yeah.
Our
not
tens
yet.
of listeners have
No.
yet to track me
All
down.
7 of them. Unfortunately they're dispersed all over the globe.
One on each continent.
One on each continent. Yeah, we do keep in
Keep
touch.
listening.
5 in
Antarctica.
Siberia.
So what you said you took 9 years off of making, or it kind of, I mean, obviously it kind of just happened more than you specifically took off 9 years, I would
It's
imagine.
my 10-year
Yeah.
plan. I'll have 9 years break, and then that's 10th year I'll get back into it.
We got in a bunch of people in college, and I got involved in a lot of weird, crazy projects. And then just about all of us moved to Portland together and tried to continue the strange, crazy projects. And even though coincidentally most of us were cartoonists or had a cartooning background, none of us really drew comics during that time. And then after that sort of died out, it took a couple of years for me to finally say, okay, if I'm gonna think of myself as a cartoonist, I have to at least have published one real graphic novel. And that got me back into it.
And what was that project
That was the Chair's hiatus.
that was the okay? Yeah, that
This is
was
great, by the way.
Well, thank you.
That's another one that in one sitting you can
Yeah.
easily polish it off. And I know it was originally published web format.
Yeah.
And then, but when you collect it, it doesn't read like that. It's not like, well, each page is a separate thought and story. It's seamless, the narrative. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Where did that come from? I mean, where did that story or
Oh,
Were you in a band?
sort of.
I don't know what that means, but keep going.
I'm
It's called a roadie.
I was.
Sort of in the band.
One of these crazy projects that I alluded to was this big, like 10-person conglomerate of people that all wanted to be in a band, and very few of them knew how to play any instruments.
Okay.
And so it was more of an experiment of a band than a band.
Like Polyphonic Spree.
It does not seem right to say yes to that question.
You never know. Like, I never know what the trombone player's doing. You know, right? Like, I know what the lead singer's doing the tambourine guy, but everybody else could be faking it. There's just a lot of noise.
Just one guy miming a trombone.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just not expecting a Polyphonic Spree reference today. Was
They
all that
happen.
took me off guard.
So for those of you who haven't read the book, it's the comic is very much about a famous established rock band. That's very much what you think of when you think of a rock band. And it seems weird to say, yes, I was in a band, because I think it makes people assume that I was drawing from that to form the comic, when really it's nothing like what's in the comic. The people in the comic take music seriously, for one thing.
Good start.
But really, mostly the characters are in a band in the comic because I wanted them to be creative people, but also I didn't want to have to show you what they made so you wouldn't judge it.
Yeah.
And you can just assume that whatever music they're making is music you'd probably like.
Well, yeah. One of the things I love. I mean, you have a lot of people reacting to the music, or at least reacting to them.
They talk about it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, which I think is obviously indicative of that. I mean, the sort of that it seems like they were very popular and good.
Yeah.
The Chairs. I mean, that was what I took away from it.
But that's the trouble, is in movies or so, if you say, like, people are reacting saying, this is the best song I've ever heard, and the people in the theater are like, this is not the best song I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And you lose respect for the people that are going crazy over it. So
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's something I want to benefit of this medium. Then.
Yeah.
And then I do think that while it's about music, like you said, being about creativity, it does feel very universal to me. I mean, like, because I mean, as a creative person, I've related to it quite a bit. I mean,
that's really cool.
yeah, and I think it's about kind of about creativity to a certain extent, or I mean, I don't know.
That was I asked Rich Stevens for a quote because he had written to me saying that he liked it, and I asked him for a quote about it, and he had said something like that too, which, to be honest, I had never really thought about it that way. Mostly, I was thinking about it as about this sort of damaged friendship between these two girls, but it could just be that so many of my closest friends are also like close creative collaborators that for me it's just very much mixed together.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, because I love. I mean, like the ending of it, I thought was so striking when they start playing the cassette of the guy, and then they start kind of doing their own thing, and then at a certain point they hit stop and they hit record, and like this whole thing about like, yeah, I mean I mean, yeah, it seems like it's a book about friendship, but it's also like the creativity is so clear is kind of how these two people communicate with each other almost.
Yeah, that's true, and they do find it very important in their relationship. So that's very true.
Yeah, and so then when you initially started making this, was the idea to put it up online from the start?
I did always have plans to print it in some way.
Okay.
Or at the very least, when I was deciding things like page size and page layout, before I started drawing it, I thought I want to make sure this is able to be printed.
Okay.
Because I had done some webcomics which don't exist anymore before that, which were infinite canvas experiments or experience in animated GIFs and things that could never be printed.
You see that a lot in webcomics, actually. People doing like cool experimental stuff online, but that will never translate to a page. Like I've talked about this on the podcast before. Dr. McNinja. In one arc, he's fighting Dracula on the moon, like you do. And there's one panel in which he's in a room full of mirrors. Because how do you fight a Dracula in a room full of mirrors?
Yeah.
And there's one panel where the head like pops down behind the character and then pops back up, and it's like that was cool on the web of just like you can't see the Dracula in the mirrors, but he's there. But yeah, on the printed page, doesn't play at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is like, so you had done some experiments with webcomics prior to Cherry's Hiatus.
Yeah.
And so I guess when you sat down to write it, it was created, I guess. It was with the intention to create a graphic novel.
Yeah.
A longer form story. I mean, so at what point did you start? Did you write out a full script for it?
I worked for several months on the plot. And then, although it didn't end up being exactly what I had written, I thought I had a full script at the time of writing it.
Okay.
Or a very tight outline. Maybe they call it a scriptment in movies?
Yeah, I've heard that thrown around.
That's a thing that I've
Because that's
heard.
one thing that interests me about like writer-artist combos. Someone who's got the whole thing in their head is, do you try to like beat for beat write out like a line for line script, or do you just have like bullet points that you know where it's going, but you leave yourself open to
I've done it both
improvise,
ways.
I guess.
I've done it both ways. With It's the End of the World, I very much just had an outline of like, this is what I want the character arcs to be, and this is what I want to happen. But I'm purposefully not doing that with the current thing that I'm writing, because that really came back to bite me. In fact, I had to put It's the End of the World on hiatus, which is part of the reason it's been so long since I've been publishing things, was that I kept realizing things that I hadn't adequately set up. I could be on page like 140. I'd be like, you know what? I'm supposed to be drawing the conclusion to this storyline, and I'm not really sure that was adequately set up before. I was like, well, maybe I'll wedge in a flashback here and try to set it up and then resolve it, and then and it just kept spiraling out of control. So I've done it both ways, although right now I'm very much swinging in one particular direction, which is scripting it all out as much as I can.
Yeah, I was just gonna say because I'm always fascinated by that as well. So with the Cherry's Hiatus, so you did have, you said, some form of outline-ish sort of thing, and then I'm always fascinated about how you. So did you finish that and then start drawing, or?
I had it roughed out. Well, the structure of the Cherry's Hiatus isn't that complicated. I had to decide, because the structure of it is the two main characters have run into had a dramatic breakup where they broke up their friendship and broke up the band, and I was going to have them reunite, and I was going to let the reader be out of the loop as to what happened in the past, and I was just going to alternate between giving out a little bit of information about what happened in the past, and then taking the present day story forward a little bit, and then a little bit more information about the past, and then a little bit more of the present day. So the structure was pretty simple. And once I had told everything that had happened in the past, then I knew it was time to wrap up what was happening in the present day.
Right.
But yeah, with It's the End of the World, it was much more complicated and a lot more balls in the air.
Sure, yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. And so do you have plans to continue It's the End of the World at some point?
I would like to come back to it.
Because I mean, just as a reader, it's sort of when I was like, there's no next thing to click. Like blazing through it and like binging it, I guess is what the kids are saying these days. It was like, no, what is it? And then part of me was like, is is this an ending? And I'm not smart enough to figure out. That happens to me all the time where I'm like, oh, isn't there supposed to be more? And people are like, no, that was the ending. Didn't you understand? That meant this because of this. And I'm like, oh, I would guess I am a terrible.
That's kind of terrible. I should put something there that says, yeah.
I figured it was
Put a little under construction sign there, you think?
something like that, maybe to be continued or something.
They're like, there's a construction sign at the end of the story. What does that mean? It's going to go both ways.
Yeah, no matter what you do, people are going to probably because I think we are used to seeing these long running stories, and then we are obsessed with arcs and stuff like readers and consumers of media and things like that. So I figured it wasn't, but part of me was just like, maybe it was supposed to be this ambiguous thing. Or
I'm going to write down right now. I need to put a link that goes to the blog post that explains why there's no more pages.
Ah, there we go.
I can't believe that. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I alerted you to
But nobody else has mentioned it to you. It's just John.
Because they've all just been sitting in quiet contemplation and perplexedness this whole time.
No, it's
They've
just
got it all figured out.
just all it took was one neurotic podcast host to come in and be like, maybe I'm missing something. It's probably me. That must be the problem here.
No, this is. I'm gonna until I have this up. I'm gonna be imagining that there's hundreds of people going to my website, getting to this page, and then saying, "I can't believe this jerk. I'm never coming back to this site again. I have no idea what's going on."
So, to sort of continue to take it back a little bit to Chair's Hiatus, you were publishing that online in a regular or somewhat regular fashion.
Yeah. It was. I didn't post a schedule, but it was roughly every week or so that I'd post a couple pages.
Yeah, and then you got positive reaction to that from people, or
I did. It mostly was once it was finished, because I treated it very much like I don't think this is a sort of orthodox approach to webcomics, but I don't really know. Like it was more of a peek behind the scenes as to, hey, I'm making a comic. Here's how it's going, sort of thing, as opposed to like, here's the newest installment, which is a finished product of its own.
I don't think there really is an orthodox method. It's sort of the Wild West where comics is concerned.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking about a little bit, because coming from being a fan of traditional comics or print comics, one of the reasons I'm fascinated to talk to people who make webcomics is because it is sort of like, it seems like you guys are kind of having to figure it out. Like, what is this thing?
It's true. I always sort of feel a little bit on the outside because there was the webcomics boom that happened with a lot of strips work, and a lot of that is still out there, but it's very much foreign to me. Although there's things that I read, it's not how I think about my own comics. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. So, once you sort of got to the end of Chair's Hiatus and you'd finished it, was there sort of a feeling of like, okay, was there a feeling of completion at the end of having released that, or was it like, okay, now I got to get it into a print form?
I had sort of planned, by the time I finished the last page, I had already been looking into different places that it could be printed, and even things like getting it onto the Kindle at the time, which seemed like the coolest thing you could do as a digital cartoonist. Although I hadn't... Normally, that's the point when regular cartoonists would be launching into their like publicity campaign and saying, "I now have a new book, and everyone go out and buy it. And I want to go on podcasts and get interviewed in blog posts and things." I very much
better late than never.
I very much sort of thought, okay, fine, I'm finally finished. Now I never have to do anything with this ever again. So yeah, I printed some copies on a print-on-demand publishing house. I took it to a couple of conventions, and then I thought I'd be done forever. But it didn't turn out to be true.
So people have continued to want copies of it and things like that?
They have. I had a friend's advice. I did a Kickstarter to produce a hardcover 2-color version because the original version was in black and white. And that has consumed the majority of the last year. So yeah. So
you're doing that? You're putting out a hardcover?
It's done.
Is it?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
With more stuff at the back. Yeah, there's extra.
There's digital stuff.
Yeah.
That you get. There's 4 additional backup stories about different characters that are in the comic. Yeah.
That's cool. You talk about that process a bit about getting the Kickstarter, getting the word out about that, because I think people who are listening to this and potentially wanting to get into this. I mean, so somebody came to you with the idea of doing the Kickstarter or suggested it.
A friend of mine, Jake, asked me. He said, "Have you ever thought about doing a color version of it?" Mm-hmm. And I told him, like, I don't know. I thought this was over. It came out almost. I think it had come out a year before at that point. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I've been to taken it to all the conventions. Now it's done. Mm-hmm. But he said it's the best way, and this is actually really good advice, which is the best way to learn about how to do a Kickstarter is to do a Kickstarter. Mm. And he said, if you do a Kickstarter,
both a good and a bad thing. Yes.
Well, he said, if you do a Kickstarter for the Chair's hiatus and it doesn't succeed, then it's fine. Like, you were considering it over with to begin with, so it's not that big of a deal. But you will have learned all these valuable lessons as to why you didn't succeed, which you can use for your next book, which was planning to be It's the End of the World, and that I couldn't have published in a paper format without having done a Kickstarter, because it has to be full color, because I drew it all in full color. So I thought I'd give it a shot. As far as it sounded like you were sort of asking for like advice for.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I've never done a Kickstarter or anything like that. I'm thinking people are probably listening to the show.
What was that experience even like running your own Kickstarter?
Kickstarter throws a lot of people who have never done manufacturing into the deep end of manufacturing, including myself, which is really what it is. Yeah. It's got less to do with drawing comics and more to do with dealing with sending out lots of shipments and organizing lots of product being created and delivered on time and things like that. So I prepared as much as I possibly could. As everything I could think of that could possibly go wrong, I tried to have a contingency plan for it, and it still completed maybe 9 months after expected. So it was really tough, but I got through it. And anything that's really hard that you successfully complete, it feels pretty good.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. So then you finished the Chair's hiatus. At what point did you go from that to did you go to It's the End of the World? Was that going to be your next thing?
I had been drawing It's the End of the World while doing the Kickstarter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then after the Kickstarter was finally over, I said, all right, now I've got no excuse but to get back to It's the End of the World, and sort of reassessed everything that I'd done so far, and that's when I realized I was screwed.
And where did It's the End of the World come from? Because I think it's like I said, I'm such a big fan of it. It's so. I mean, obviously, it's sort of moving more into a genre territory with being the end of the world, but it's still that very intimate, personal, character-driven stuff that you were doing in Chair's hiatus as well, just on with a different set of characters, but sort of with this background of the end of the world.
It's true. I'm trying to remember what my thought process was when I was coming up with it. I did like the idea of telling a story more about teenagers, and the parallel between, in the story, the characters a group of teenagers find out that the world is ending within weeks or months. It's unclear, and it's not explained why the world is ending to the reader, but everyone on Earth sort of agrees, yeah, it's ending.
Which I love the definity of it. They said like there's the part with the or they're watching the TV and they're asking the scientists like, no, we're 100% sure the world's going to end. I'm just like, how could you possibly be 100% sure?
But they're not really certain as to when. Right. So it's mostly people, these characters coming to terms or deciding what they want to do with their last time. And I like the idea that they don't go and try to, crash airplanes or go hot air ballooning or I don't know, whatever sort of extreme thing you'd think you'd do when you only had a certain amount of time to live. They did what a lot of people that I'm told who have been diagnosed with terminal diseases do, is you spend if you've got a lot of extra time left, you still need to earn money and you still need to go to work and you still need to survive. So you do a lot of the same old things that you had been doing just to get by.
Yeah, I love that there's the one character who's upset that there's not more rioting. like why aren't people freaking out? We need more anarchy around here.
Yeah. It was that I forgot the original question. Oh yeah, but then the other aspect that I was trying to work in there was a lot of the things that I enjoyed doing during my 9-year break from comics were really bizarre, crazy, almost practical joke stunt art projects. And that is totally absent from the Chair's hiatus.
Right.
So I wanted to create a world where it was possible to do very strange things that and that's built into there. That's why there's rocket ships and jetpacks that are just occasionally sort of mentioned in the background, just to establish like I'm allowed to do whatever I want in this story.
Yeah, because that was actually, I mean, like reading through it, I was like, is this the future of some sort? Because like it starts with a guy in a car, and then there's another guy with a jetpack who just like flies down. He's like, hey, takes off, and like there's the almost like bat signal like projections of information into the sky and stuff. It's cool. That was just kind of like, and then there's also. And I mean, obviously, it ended before there was any explanation of this. There's some kind of bubbling substance coming up from the ground.
It's funny. I'm remembering all this just right before you're saying that. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
it's true.
And I wasn't sure if that was. I mean, I assume that was to be some kind of clue potentially.
John, no spoilers.
I don't want to spoil it.
Read it when everybody else reads it.
I don't know. I don't often have somebody here that usually we have people on who have finished projects or whatever. So this is the first time I can be like, what was up with that?
Yeah. Well. It's difficult to really say. One of the things that I used to love to do in these other projects that I mentioned was make people. We used to like to see how far we could confuse people intentionally.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of that in there,
okay.
Although I won't say in which aspect.
Sure.
Because I do hope to come back to it someday.
Yeah. Well, I guess my question is not what's going on so much as like, did you have more planned for this? Were there in your head at least answers to these questions in some of them at least?
I had planned where the character arcs were going to end up. There's bits like, will jetpacks factor into the story later, or will the rocket ships come into play? There's different drafts in which they have minor impact on the story, but mostly it's there to make the world feel a particular way.
Right, yeah. No, and I really like that. It's one of my favorite things about it. It's just like all of a sudden there's a rocket ship next to a house, and you're like, okay.
The other thing that's nice about that is you, the reader, get to see that this isn't our world. This is set, a little bit in the future or a different, something, an alternate timeline that you can kind of forget about your planetary mortality and be like, oh, okay, it's just a story. If you were talking about the end of the world and everything felt very modern, very fresh, it was like, we're going to look up at the sky all the time. Like after each page, looking up, making sure everything's okay. Looking for bubbling, like John's been doing all week.
Yeah, just searching the streets for any kind of bubbling. Yeah, but no, I think that's one of the things that I really liked about it was I kind of forgot about the end of the world stuff from time to time because I did get so caught up in what was going on with the characters, and it felt very. I think a lot of your work feels very relatable and very. I mean, is that something you strive to do, and it's to make things that are very grounded, and I mean, aside from the jetpacks and stuff like that,
literally ungrounded, but
yeah, but because everything is very steeped in sort of emotions, whether it be broken friendships or this sort of unrequited love that's in it's the end of the world. I mean, do you have aspirations to draw like a Spider-Man or something someday?
It's funny that it's true. When I'm coming down to draw an actual page of comics, pretty much everything is centered around what is the beat that the character is feeling, and I often have to remind myself that some of these beats have to be what happens next. But normally I would say that no, I don't really have much urge to draw like a superhero strip. But a while ago, my friend Ryan was potentially going to be working on a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book.
Ooh.
And I remembered thinking, God, I am so jealous of him. I would so love to draw a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic, even though I would be a terrible choice for it. I would do that in a heartbeat.
There are some real conflicted emotions with Raphael from panel to panel that I think you'd be able to get across.
I would draw,
Guy's a broody bastard.
I would draw the most boring Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book, and it would be awesome.
We want to see it. We want to see it.
It can't be any worse than a lot of the stuff we've pitched on this show about, like my mini series about Tony Stark when he's not in the Iron Man costume, he's just going to parties and
Yes.
or
On our other podcast, we pitched Alfred taking home all the women that Bruce dumps as he gets in the cowl, and just like taking them home and like, what are the conversations?
yeah, all the like models he just takes to charity events and then ditches as soon as it's over so he can go be Batman, and
Like
just
Alfred
those
has
awkward
to-
conversations of Alfred driving these women home.
like getting stuck in traffic and having to like stretch the conversation. And
I'm imagining that scene from Wonder Boys where Michael Douglas is driving
Yeah.
home with
Yeah.
and they're just having this conversation, and she's taking off her makeup and things.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Oh yeah. Well, DC, it's theirs. It's yours for the taking.
we would read it. We totally would read it.
Something we were talking about actually before we were recording was the is it I don't know the exact name, the 24-hour
Comic Book Day.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Comic in the Day.
which is something you participate in.
or I did once. So far.
You did, yeah. Can we talk about that experience a little bit? I mean, I only know just a bit about this. So what is that kind of? You can let the listeners know.
The idea is that you draw a 24-page comic in 24 hours without having written any of it in advance. So you wake up without knowing what's going to happen, without what your story is going to be about. You write the story and draw 24 pages before going back to sleep again.
That sounds insane.
And
It's
some of the more like strip-based comics online will do like a panel every hour about like just their day-to-day lives. Some guys will do like whole pages where they're doing a story in 24 pages.
there's another thing too called the where I think you're supposed to draw a comic each hour. And I think that's sometimes what you'll see is cartoonists will put up 2 or 3 panels every hour saying this is what this last hour was like, which is on a different day than 24-hour Comics Day.
So that's why it happens twice a year.
But yeah, I did it last year, and I'm eager to do it again.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that went? What was that process like?
It's well, I imagine everybody is. It's a little bit different. I loved breaking it down as a problem and figuring out, like doing the math and saying, okay, I need to draw for 22 minutes, and then I can take a 5-minute break, and then how many minutes will I need to eat lunch, and when should I put ice on my arm, and
Can I draw left-handed?
yeah. Well, and I worked on problems like when I wrote the story, I read advice saying things like, make sure to have a couple splash pages in it, so by the time you can't draw anymore, you can get a page done in just a minute because you just have one set of images to draw for that page. And I drew the most complicated pages first, so by the time it was 11 o'clock at night, and I'd been up all day, I was just drawing the simple pages. I forgot the original question.
Oh, I was just asking about sort of what the experience of that was like, and I mean, I think,
Yeah.
and people can read that on your website.
Yeah.
It's called Berg. Is that right?
Yeah. That's MatthewBogart.net.
Oh, there we
That's
go.
my website.
And this year, it sounds like you're hoping to do a Patreon where people actually get to add elements to this.
I did make a Patreon stretch goal that I'm calling the Patreon Chaos Book,
Yeah.
where people can submit ideas, terms that they would want to see in a comic. And then on the day, I'll open up my Google spreadsheet where all these terms will be collected. And I'll say, okay, I guess I'm drawing a comic about bananas and cactuses and President Nixon and, and just... And
Saucy.
Yeah. Or whatever I find in there at that time.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking of giving out artwork to Patreon backers too of that comic.
Cool.
It's a fun experiment, and it's a fun way to remind myself how much I'm able to get done in a certain amount of time, especially on the days when it seems like the comic will never end. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what is sort of your work process or ethic, or do you have a specific thing? Do you have like a regimented, I will draw for this long on this many days, or?
Since I've been working on the script for my next graphic novel for the last few months, I get off from my day job,
Mm-hmm.
and I walk across the street to an office building which has a big lobby,
Mm-hmm.
and I sit down in the lobby and force myself to write for usually about 2 hours before I allow myself to go home.
Cool.
So I work an 8-hour day, and then I write for 2 hours, and then I go home. And if I can, after that, I'll sit down and write more.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a minimum of trying to write 2 hours every day after work.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah, I imagine I'm not that regimented about my stuff. I wish I was.
I am. But
Okay.
it's very similar where it's like you gotta kind of have to force yourself to, even after days of work,
Yeah.
edging out that time for what you consider to be your, like, yes, I lift heavy boxes as a living, but that's not my job.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, my job is sitting home and writing. Like, that's what I need to think about every time I'm home. If I could, like, yeah, I could sit down and play video games, but I shouldn't.
Yeah. I find it really useful that which I've just sort of stumbled on the last few months, that idea of like, I'm not allowed to go home until I do this work. Because oftentimes when I get home, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just make dinner first. And then,
Right.
oh, my girlfriend's home. I should ask her how her day is. And then she's like, I just made dinner. Do you want to watch a TV show? And I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds like, and then
Yeah.
it's tomorrow.
Right. Right. So you're working on something now. It's a new project. Any idea? I mean, can you tell us anything about that?
I'm on the 4th draft of the script.
Okay.
And I'm hoping I'm going to do a series of roughs before I start drawing. I'm going to try to rough out the whole book. But if that goes well, I hope to be drawing it within the next couple months.
Cool.
And I'll be publishing the pages as I draw it.
Cool.
It's a story about relationships.
I was just going to ask, is it in the... It does seem like you have a sort of running themes throughout your work.
Sure.
Yeah, or I mean, there's a
And that's not a negative thing.
no, not
No,
at
no,
all.
no.
But I mean that there is sort of a I mean, in what I've read of it, there does seem to be a Matt Bogart style or approach, if you will, to not just the artwork. 'Cause, I mean, you definitely have. I mean,
Each creative person has a poison. Each creative person has a voice that they bring to their work.
Absolutely.
Yours shines through particularly well.
but it does seem like you're particularly interested in human relationships. I mean, on this very intimate level, as whether it be romantic or friendship or creative, even.
It's true. I have a weekly call with another cartoonist friend of mine who draws comics about his most recent one was about Roosevelt getting dental surgery on a boat.
Which Roosevelt?
I don't remember.
All right.
Sounds like Teddy.
And
He seems like a boat dentistry kind of guy.
And then the comic he drew before that was about a mysterious breakdancer who'd gone missing in the 80s and things. And I was like, I have no idea how you come up with ideas like this. Like these stories in my hands would just be people sitting around on sofas talking about like what it's like to miss someone, or like
Yeah.
I make my comics sound terrible.
No, they're really good. It's nice to see that. I mean, and obviously people have this image of comic books being whether about superheroes or The Walking Dead, even, or I mean these sort of things where, but you're almost kind of doing like the Sundance movies of comics or something, like
Sure.
Yeah, these kind of things, which is and is that something you want to continue doing? I mean, I guess I asked about Spider-Man earlier, but I mean, do you have aspirations to cross into more specific sci-fi? I mean, obviously, It's the End of the World has sci-fi touches to it.
Well, I can say that before I get started drawing my next graphic novel, I've just finished writing and just started drawing the actual page for a 10-page story that I'm going to draw today, which has superheroes in it.
Oh,
So if
Familiar or original superheroes?
original superheroes.
Nice.
Well, yes.
Right.
I won't say much about it.
Sure.
But this will be the first time I've drawn a superhero comic since the 90s. Wow.
Which was the heyday of superhero comics, especially
I mean,
pouches.
heyday is a term you
There
could
was a
use.
lot of hay-colored hair.
that's cool though. So I mean, yeah. So
It's not going to be like anything, and it's safe to say that it's not going to be like anything anyone is expecting.
okay,
Which I think is a good teaser to say, go to my website.
Yeah.
very cool. Yeah, which is Matt or Matthew Bogart?
MatthewBogart.net.
Matthew
If you
Bogart.
Google Matt Bogart, in case you're wondering, there is an actor with an IMDb page of Matt Bogart. So just make sure
which is not him.
well,
Is that Humphrey's son?
I think it's grandson, Humphrey's grandson.
Humphrey.
Anyways, I found that when somebody's like, "Oh, I have this interview happened through a mutual friend of Matt and myself," and he's like, "Oh yeah, just Google this guy." I was like, "Great," and then I was like, "Who is this person? He doesn't draw comics, but he's like movie famous. Like, what is?
I guess we should talk to him anyways. We
Yeah,
were shocked when we walked in here.
I'm just grateful that that guy is no longer an underwear model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's made the transition, folks, to acting.
He's aged enough that he no longer has his underwear modeling shots on mattbogart.com.
That's why you got
That is
the
not
.net.
what people were expecting when I was Googling for my comics.
Yeah.
Right. Oh.
It's a relationship piece of a sort.
They're like, man, this guy must spend a lot of time in the gym when he's not drawing the comics.
So you work right now as writer and artist and colorist on some things. Have you ever spent time in a partnership where you're doing only one bit of it, or if you have, when was that, and how was that compared to what you're doing now?
I've done a little bit of freelance work. I've done some color. I was 1/3 of the coloring team behind a graphic novel about the history of beer that's going to be coming out this year.
Cool.
Awesome.
But
Mostly just beer.
yeah,
It's going to play well in the Portland market for sure.
it's actually really cool. And
Yeah.
if you see it, you should look through it. It's
yeah.
great. It's called The History of Beer.
All right.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Oh, we'll check it out.
Or maybe it might just be called
Beer.
Beer.
Even better.
Sells itself.
People are trying to drink it. People are. It's rough.
Yeah.
Hey, after a couple,
Donovan, hold on.
legitimate beers.
We riff on the show. We have fun. But never have anyone suggested that people are drinking books.
Here's the problem.
That's
These
because this
people
book
are-
hasn't been published yet.
That's right.
This is the first one.
I'm just mentioning to the
So
marketing
good you'll
team.
want to drink it. It'll say on
If
one
the
of the pull
marketing
quotes.
team hasn't thought of that, maybe just put a liability thing at the back. That, if
Do
you
not attempt to
if you
drink
If you
book.
try to consume this book, yeah,
We just want to, we just want to look out for the legality of this book.
Like I
That's
said,
what we're
after a
saying.
couple of legitimate beers, things look pretty cool.
Sure.
It says beer.
Just going to the ER, paper cuts all over his face. What happened, doctor? Well, he got a little sauce and he tried to drink a book.
All right,
Yet another one
get
of
in
these.
line.
huh?
Yeah, get in line.
Oh, boy, yeah. So that's cool. You worked as one of the colorists on that, you said?
Yeah, but that's the only time I've ever. Normally, when I think about doing comics, I think about it as a complete
It's a
form.
soul.
where,
Yeah, you're a soul
I
creator.
come up with an idea and then it becomes a book.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about that. A lot of our favorite artists and writers are both, because I think you got less ability to lose that, to get for something to get lost in translation, basically. Then, I mean, if it's all
Also, there's that essential spark that you can really feel when you've got the writer-artist combo that you don't necessarily get unless it's like a really super strong partnership with
Right.
the writer-artist teams that like really shines through in the work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jim Lee said something years and years ago, which has always stuck with me, which was just the idea that it's like being a filmmaker, except you get to be the director and the writer and the props master and the costume designer, and you get to play every single part. The only thing that limits you is you have to be able to draw it. And that sounds fascinating to me, because every one of those jobs I'd love to. I don't have enough lifetimes to explore every one of those careers.
Right.
Comics is the closest that I can come.
well, that's like when Trevor Dodge was on the show. He sort of said that comics are like the bastard child of all the other mediums to a certain extent. I mean, which is true. It's sort of like that. There's the visual nature of film, but also the literary style of prose writing. Sort of all combines into this thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do kind of get to explore all that. I hadn't heard that Jim Lee quote, but that makes a lot of sense. Because I was going to say the writer-artist is almost like, and taken to a further extreme, like the auteur theory in filmmaking to a certain extent.
Except for the director doesn't normally play all the parts as well.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or be in charge of all the props and sets and lighting and everything.
Well, unless you're Robert Rodriguez.
Well, yeah, but we can't all have like green screen studios in our backyards.
Right. Or just be insane and not need to sleep. So who are some of the people who inspired you, or artists or writers, or I mean, what are the comics? We talked about what sort of started the initial spark, but what were the comics over the years that have really influenced you?
Back in the day, the things that meant the most to me when I was trying to figure all this out, there was Dave Sim and Jeff Smith. I started buying superhero books like 6 months before Image happened, so that was a big deal. Todd McFarlane and Eric Larson and things. Even though it would be weird to find aspects of that in my work that couldn't be more different from what I'm currently doing. More, it's funny to say more recently, and then mention a bunch of cartoonists that were most popular like 15 years ago, but like Chris Ware or Adrian Tomei or David. Oh, so many names that I'm being forced to say for the first time. David LaFamme, if that might be how it's pronounced.
Oh, this podcast is nothing but us butchering people's names. So.
Yeah. Who did Stray Bullets?
Yeah.
That's
yeah. I can see some of the comics on your shelf actually, right across from me. Stray Bullets, Bone, Black Hole is over there.
Habibi's behind me.
I see Habibi over there, which we're big Craig Thompson fans on the show.
Yeah, that's true. That's behind you on the shelf, however, because I've never read it.
Oh,
Finally, someone else who hasn't read it yet.
I mean, you see from the size that it's going to take a while to get through, but it is.
It's really.
You probably
really
flip
exciting.
through it at least and seen just.
And I love all of Craig Thompson's work. I'm
Yeah.
ashamed to say that I haven't read it, but
Well, you'll get there. Don't worry about that.
I can dream.
We will.
I like the positive coaching attitude.
You never
Don't
know.
worry, buddy. You're gonna get there. You're gonna read it.
That's right.
I've come so close. It's sitting in my house.
That's
That's better than I'm doing.
yeah. you don't even have a copy of it.
No, it scares me.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you guys specifically want to ask, Matt? If not, then I think we'll turn to one of my favorite segments on the show that we only get to do when we have a guest, and that's when we turn things over to Weird Questions with Donovan Eilert.
Okay, so I have a few questions for you. First, if you could choose any mentor for yourself from a fictional medium, like a fictional, I guess any piece of art, who would you choose?
So a fictional character that
Yeah.
would mentor me?
Yeah. In any kind of capacity. Mentor as an author, mentor as a chef, as a house painter, whatever you choose.
As a house painter.
It takes a lot of practice.
Now
you
I'm
can't just
running
walk
through my
right
head
into that.
Who's your fictional house
painter?
Or just characters who seem like they'd be good at house painting.
Well, yeah, I'm having trouble coming up with mentor characters. There's Obi-Wan Kenobi or
All
Grady
right.
Tripp. Or,
What stage of Obi-Wan Kenobi? Are we talking like Alec Guinness or Ewan McGregor?
I'm not sure
or
Ewan McGregor has much to teach.
He just seems
anyone.
very confused and angry
He's
by a
just
lot of
kinda
what's going
there.
on.
He's
yeah.
working on it. He's trying really hard.
You got to go wise old wizard Obi-Wan
All right.
Kenobi.
It really seems like the Ewan McGregor conversation would just be like,
My way or the highway.
or just like, so hey, how's it going? And it's like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's true.
You know that Anakin kid? You might want to keep an eye on that.
Yeah,
What?
that's true. All right, next question. Is Obi-Wan Kenobi an all right answer? I mean, did you have a...
I have no other mentors that come to mind.
All right.
So
I mean, that's not a bad
And-
choice.
sure.
Next question. If you had to, at your funeral, play an album for everybody in your audience, is that what you call people? At your viewing, the people that come to your funeral have to listen to an album all the
Survivors,
way
I believe,
through.
is the term.
Survivors,
You survived by.
And it has to either be a B-52s album or an REM album. What do you choose? They have to listen to the whole thing straight through.
You sure it being my funeral doesn't excuse me from any future responsibilities?
Yep, you're dead and gone. You get to say whatever you want to say through that music.
Well, I also
last
get to
time.
remain silent on that.
Yep, that's right. That's absolutely right.
I love that. Then I choose that option.
All right.
He's going to plead the fifth
All right. Fair enough.
on the REM versus B-52s.
And
That's the one question I get a pass on because I'll be dead.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Well,
right.
you're the first person to pass on any of the weird questions, but you gave him the opening, Donovan. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the rule book.
Yeah. If it's about
and-
funerals, you can say no.
And if tomorrow you woke up in Jeff Goldblum's body, what is one of the first things you would do?
I've never had a satisfactory answer to this question.
Of all the times it's been asked.
Yeah.
I know, yeah. All these years still.
One of the first things I would do.
Yeah.
One of the first things, yes.
I'm assuming it would be bathe.
All right.
I don't imagine. For some reason, I'm imagining Jeff Goldblum is not smelling very good.
You think he's a morning shower or a
Well,
night shower?
Forget getting him on the show, I guess.
It really depends on the circumstance that Jeff Goldblum is in. But yeah,
Wake up as Jeff Goldblum in like a dumpster in the back of a Denny's or something.
I mean, if he
Yeah, then I think bathe is a really good answer.
there's all kinds of things. Like I'd pull the ripcord if it was appropriate.
Wake up, you're descending.
Oh, no.
But yeah,
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your
That's been
answers.
yet another... That might be the weirdest installment of Weird Questions with Donovan Eilert.
It's
even.
going to keep going that way, John.
I will say, if there was ever a sequel to Being John Malkovich, I would hope it would be Being Jeff Goldblum.
Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
He's not doing anything else right now, is he? He's on any shows?
He's doing, Independence Day 2.
Oh, good.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Yep.
I'm
The
glad
movie
he's-
everyone was clamoring for.
In 1998. So we turn now, as we always do, end every show with our recommendation segment, where we recommend comics we think you should be reading. We usually, Matt, do you have anything? We usually start with our guest.
yeah, sure.
What do you think our listeners should check out?
The comic that I'm just gauging whether it's gotten the attention that it deserves by whenever I mention it on Twitter, no one responds.
Okay.
Which is a crime to me, is Stray Bullets.
Ah, yes.
Both the original series and the newer series, which is a different format than the original series, but is still fantastic. I think everybody should check out.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to me the amount of quality story that guy can fit in 22 pages.
No, it's insane.
Yeah.
Really. That's. I mean, I see that. Yeah, we mentioned it's over on the shelf over there, but yet what a piece of work, really. I mean, like when you sit down and look at that, it's amazing the accomplishment of that.
Yeah, and that's the way to do a comic book comeback as well. The way he
Oh
did,
yeah.
where you don't draw the final issue of a series for a decade, and then you return with the final issue, the giant collected edition, and the first issue of the new series all at once.
Yep.
That's cool.
That was an exciting day.
That is
the,
how it's done, sir.
Oh, it's the end of the world kind of idea. Lay off of it for a little while and then just pop it right back in.
And then you can start. Oh, it's still the end of the world, right? Is the new series?
Well, John, come
Or,
on.
oh,
it's the beginning of the new world.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, it's the new world. There you go.
Oh, it's the new world.
There it is.
Which is
Perfect.
Christopher Columbus
Once again,
themed.
you can have all those ideas. They are yours to do with as you please, sir.
I already own all those domain names.
Great.
That was very quick. We just watched you purchase those as we were speaking.
Amazing. Gurgani, what do you got?
I've got speaking of End of the World, I've got a fun book called Wasteland. It's by Anthony Johnston, and the art is by Christopher Mitten. It is a post-apocalyptic story of of the horrid wasteland that is what's left of Earth 100 years after some kind of big apocalypse that's referred to as the Big Wet.
Okay.
It's a fun, just like kind of Mad Maxy post-apocalyptic world. People wandering through the wasteland. It's got a lot to do with like the kind of the politics around this big city-state that's kind of become the haven of safety, and kind of the religious differences between the guy who's running it being worshipped as a god and these people who like sun worship has kind of come back into existence on the planet, of like that being the primary religion, and the kind of lord of the city-state really not treating those people very well. And our main character is a guy named Michael who's wandering through the wasteland, and he helps out a bunch of these sun worshippers as their town gets burned to the ground by a bunch of maniacs,
As you do.
as it happens in the wasteland. And then the first trade that I've read is like them kind of picking up and moving to this city state, and then like clearly there's some more stuff that's going to happen. I just discovered this book. There's like 13 trades of it out right now, and I need to go buy them all. Like, the series started in 2006, and I just discovered it now, and it's like, oh, good, now I've got to buy all of these books because I need them right now.
Wow.
Cool.
But yeah, Wasteland is a really good.
Awesome. Donovan, what do you got?
This is going to be a strange recommendation, but I feel out of necessity that I'm
Okay.
doing this.
Okay.
As I'm talking to more people about, do you read comics? And they give me the yes answer, which I always know is basically a no answer at this point. But
Do you say yes? Do you read comics? You're basically lying.
but and then after further inquiry, I get to The Killing Joke, and there are a surprising number of people who quote unquote read comics who have never read The Killing Joke, and it just blows my mind. So I am formally recommending this to everybody who's
Putting it
listening.
down. It's on the record.
Don't ever say that I didn't. It's an Alan Moore work about the Joker. You know who the Joker is? You do? Do you really? Do you want to know more about the Joker? Read this. Maybe you might know more about him after you read it. And
Maybe.
it's pivotal in the now dead DC universe. But at the time, pivotal and still has implications through today. I mean, it is... They still
It's
draw
amazing.
through... I feel like a lot of that is still canon, even though they've rebooted it a couple of times since then.
Absolutely.
And it is haunting. It is a great piece of Batman mythos. So that's...
And it's really short.
It's so easy. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list since it came out. You can find it at any bookstore.
They keep
has
coming
that.
out with new editions
Yeah,
of it.
the
and,
deluxe edition is great. The hardcover of that. I mean, everything. It's been parodied over and over again. It is. It's kind of essential that you read it.
Yep. Absolutely. It's an essential
if you
Batman
don't read
story
comics, maybe don't start with that. But know that it's soon after.
for sure.
Okay,
Killing Joke.
That's my formal recommendation. The
Very
Killing
cool.
Joke by Alan Moore.
So I've got a Star Wars comic actually this week.
I'm giddy.
Let me see. The title of it is Star Wars Rebel Heist.
Ooh.
It's by Matt Kint and Marco Castillo. This is a cool book where it's a 4-issue miniseries, each one focusing on a different Star Wars character. So the first one's Han Solo, then I think it's Leia, Chewbacca, and then Luke. But between the 4, you get each one has a different piece in a rebel plan to disrupt the Empire, as you would expect.
This takes place sometime between like episodes 1 and 2 or 2 and 3.
Yeah, like
4
A
and
New
5.
Hope and Empire, probably it's somewhere in there.
I'm sorry, were there other episodes?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere between the first
There's
and second movie,
Clone
I would
Wars,
imagine.
Revenge of the Sith, and then the rest.
But the cool thing is that all of them are told from the perspective of rebel agents. So you see these characters through the eyes of, like grunts, basically.
Sure.
The
The equivalent to red shirts of the
Yeah, so you
the
get to
Rebel
see
Alliance.
like how that guy reacts to seeing Han Solo for the first time, and the internal narration of like there he is, and he's like this guy's surrounded by. A bunch of nefarious characters, and suddenly they all get shot because Han Solo can quick draw over everybody else and stuff like that. So it's cool to see them as these mythic characters, or a guy who is prejudiced against Wookiees until he sees how awesome Chewbacca is, and that Chewbacca's got his back, and I can deal with the smell because this guy is the real deal. And so it's a really fun book, and it also the 4 add up together, and you realize that you're looking at the same thing, even though they all have their separate pieces, and so it comes together in sort of this Ocean's 11 style, intricate plan.
When did this just come out recently?
I think it was last year, maybe. It's a super fun book.
Kind of shocked I'd never heard of this.
Star Wars Rebel Heist. It was I think it was one of the last Dark Horse published ones
Okay.
before everything went back to Marvel. So Star Wars Rebel Heist. Cool. So I think that's going to do it for our episode today. Matt, where can people find you online? We already mentioned MatthewBogart.com or .net. .net.
Very important.
.net. But you're also on Twitter.
At Matthew Bogart.
And are you elsewhere on social media and such?
The main other place that I post is on my Patreon from time to time, which is patreon.com/Matthew Bogart.
There you go. Very cool. And people can support you through there and stuff?
Yeah.
Cool.
Or I believe there's a way you can just follow without supporting as well.
Okay,
if you
cool.
just want to see the public posts.
Awesome.
But where would the fun in that be?
And of course, as always, you can follow us on Twitter. We're at Panel on Panels. We're also on Facebook as Panel on Panels. We have an Instagram. We have a Pinterest. We also have an email address, which is panelonpanels@gmail.com. And we are part of the Don't Adjust Your Ninja podcast network, which you can find at don'tadjustyourninja.com.
We're a network now?
We are a network now.
Two shows does a network make?
Yep.
That's right.
Fair enough.
That's how it works. If you want to check out some of our other shows, you can find them on there, or just keep looking at this one if you want.
I encourage that. I'm not on the other ones.
But cool. So for Panel on Panels this week, I've been John Campbell.
I am currently Mike Ergoni.
I will always be Donovan Eiler.
Keep reading comics, everyone.